So here's what we're going to do. We've got 1 hour tonight, and we're going to fly through this as quick as we can. And what we're going to do, I have put together a packet of information for you, and I emailed you a copy of this earlier today. You can do whatever you want with this. I gave it to you in Word, Microsoft Word, so you can edit it, print just the pages you want, print all of it, doesn't matter to me, whatever's helpful to you. Let me tell you how this is organized, and we're just going to go through it like it's a Bible study, and I'll walk you through it so that when you guys meet next week, you're ready to go. You feel good about it. So front page is just dates mostly, dates and Bible passages. Divides up how we're going to divide up 1 Peter. If you get ahead or behind, don't worry about it. Just do what you do. It's not that big a deal. You'll see tonight I've included a lot of information. You will not be able to get through all of this. So you're going to have to pick what do you care about most, what do you like most, and then focus on that because there's no way you'll get through all of this stuff. Second page and third page are not every, but all the significant New Testament passages about Peter. Since he's the author, it's good to start with who the guy was, rather than giving you a list of passages and then say, look all these up, which is time-consuming and slow. I just printed them for you. It'd be a lot easier. You can see them at a glance. If you want to go through these with your group, and then I've got some questions relating to the character of Peter and his development, you can use those. If that doesn't interest you or you want to keep it moving and skip that, totally up to you. But that's all there for you. Those passages are just his life in the New Testament. If I can, yeah, I'll come back to it. First, let me just keep walking through this. This is the fourth page now, has to do with the audience of the book. And you can see the subheading up there, the internal evidence of the book itself. These are passages from 1 Peter implying something about who he's writing to, the audience that's receiving the book. All right? And I've underlined the relevant portions. The fifth page then is just a half-page summary background. This is the kind of thing you might find in a Bible commentary. It's just a quick overview of what the book is about, where Peter was going with this, what the time frame of the book's writing was, cultural focus. It's quick and simple. And then the last 2 pages are the actual text. I've actually printed the text. In case you wanted to put the text out there, you don't have to. You have people bring their Bibles and look it up, whatever you want. But I put the text there for our first session. And then questions at the bottom. And you will notice that I've divided the questions up. The first set of questions are about the author, Peter, and the audience who he's writing to. The second set of questions is about the Bible text itself, digging into the scripture passage. It's only 12 verses, but digging into those 12 verses and asking questions about them. And then the third section is application, discipleship application. So what am I supposed to do with this? What does this have to do with my life? There's no way you're getting through all those questions. You could do 2 of those and spend the whole night working on 2 of those if you get a good discussion going. So it's probably to your benefit to go through this ahead of time and decide which ones you really like and then lean on those. And then if you have extra time, you can always go back with more questions. But pick the couple you like so you don't get bogged down talking about Peter's character development and then never get into the text. Think about your time because you could end up talking about Peter. Oh, yeah, we denied Jesus. Yeah. You talk about all the stuff in the Gospels about Peter, and then you got 5 minutes left, and you're like, oh, we haven't even read the 1 Peter section yet. So think strategically about how you want to divide up your time, and then kind of move it that direction. You want them to leave with these 2 or 3 things. So what are they? Decide that ahead of time, and then if it's running long on one of those, cut it off and move on in a kind, gentle way. Yeah. Janice?
Would it be okay to take like pages 1, 2, and 3 and give that to them ahead of time and let them read that? That way it will give them time together. It's not really...
You can burn this in the wastebasket, forward it to them in its entirety, or copy pages with a Bible commentary and just read it. I'm just putting this together to be helpful to you. You do whatever you want with it. Yep, if you want to send them page 3 only, do it. Whatever. And the reason I put it in Word is so you could edit it. I want to delete all the questions I don't want to talk about. Just delete them right off Word and then hit print. And then you'll have your own personalized copy of this handout. Yeah, good question. Thank you, James. Any other questions just about the quick overview here of the book? Of the Bible study packet. Okay, let's go through this real quick. So So we're talking about 1 Peter. I'm going to go really fast, right? So just don't leave this fast. But we're getting started with 1 Peter tonight. And the first question that you always want to ask when you get into a book is, who's the author and what's his agenda? What is the point of his writing? And who is this person? So what we have in the first section is a whole bunch of passages about the person of Peter himself. So let's read through a couple of these real quick, just to get kind of a flavor for Peter. Now we won't read the first one because that's the call of Peter, and I think you know that when he's fishing and his brother comes and gets him, come and see Jesus. And if you look at verse 42 of that very first passage, his brother brought him to Jesus, and Jesus said, "You are Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas," which means Peter. Peter, you know, is the word that means rock, Petra, in Greek. Cephas is the Aramaic version of the same word. So you've got Simon, Peter, Cephas, same guy. All the same guy. Okay? Cephas is just Aramaic for Peter. Peter's Greek, Cephas is Aramaic. So then Matthew 16, the next one there, this is the famous one everybody knows about. It's, you know, Peter gets his reputation for being kind of a loudmouth here in Matthew 16, but somebody want to read that for us? Read quick.
Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, you are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man."
What a great passage. You're Peter, I'm going to build my church on this rock, I'm going to change your name, keys of the kingdom. Get behind me, Satan, you are a hindrance to me. I mean, 3 verses, and you get this just night and day with Peter. And that's a good summary for Peter's life in many ways. He is courageous and bold and gets himself into trouble a lot. Because he's so brash and wants to be out front. He's a leader, he's a natural leader. He's one of the leaders of the disciples in Jerusalem, but he kind of gets his foot in his mouth too. I don't know, I love that about Peter because he's so human there. If you've got those pictures on the front, I pulled out some pretty famous pictures of St. Peter, and you'll notice that in the top one, the 2 Rembrandts in particular, you see what he's clutching there, what's laying next to him in the other one. Keys of the kingdom. Yeah. Keys of the kingdom. Anyway, so John 13 then is the washing of the disciples' feet. Peter says, no, this is an example of Peter being kind of brash and bold. You are not washing my feet, Lord. It's not right. It's not appropriate. You're the rabbi. You don't do that. And Jesus says, look, if I don't wash your feet, you don't really have any role to play here. Peter says, oh, then wash all of me. Jesus says, no, you don't need all of you. It's just the feet. This is just, Peter, shh, just be quiet. Right? Just listen. Right? This is Peter. Matthew 26, here goes Peter again. When they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives. This is right before the crucifixion. Then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. But Peter answered, even if every one of these falls away, he's pointing at all the other disciples, I will never fall away. And Jesus said, oh, Peter, before this very night. And look how he ends that section, 35. Even if I have to die with you, I won't deny you. What is it? 2 hours later? Yeah, this. Peter. Anyway, so Matthew 26 is the denial. You know that story. He's in the courtyard of the high priest. He gets asked 3 times. And 75, verse 75, he went out. very end there, went out and wept bitterly at his denial. He knew. He knew. John 21 is after the resurrection of Jesus. This is when they're on the beach. The disciples go out fishing. Jesus is on the shore. He says, hey, throw your nets out on the right side of the boat. They bring in a big catch. Oh, it's Jesus. They all come to shore. And then Jesus has this conversation with them, and in particular, he nails Peter. And there's a sharp edge to this conversation, because Jesus asked Peter 3 times, Simon, do you love me? Now, the 3 times thing seems, it doesn't say this in the text, but you won't read a single Bible scholar who doesn't think that 3-part repetition is directly related to Peter's 3-part denial. And you can see that even in verse 17, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he asked him the 3rd time. Well, why is he grieved? Well, hanging in the background of this conversation is Peter's denial, and he knew it. So Peter is reinstated here, but there's a bit of a rebuke there. There's a bit of a calling back, a bit of a, hey, don't be so cocky. Anyway. Acts 4, this is just a tiny little passage, but it says something about them. This is after Peter's Pentecost sermon. The Sanhedrin calls him and says, don't preach anymore. And when the Sanhedrin saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized they'd been with Jesus. So uneducated common men does not mean dumb. It also does not mean illiterate. What it means is they didn't go to Hebrew school for 23 years. They weren't Pharisees. They were normal people. So don't take the uneducated here to mean they were illiterate and dumb. It just means they weren't professional scholars. They weren't scribes, right? And then this is an interesting one in Galatians. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but this is Paul. He's kind of summarizing his ministry in Galatia. And I want you to jump all the way down to where I've highlighted at the end. He goes to Jerusalem. Look, notice how it starts in verse 2 there. After 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus with me, and then jumped down to the bottom. On the contrary, when the disciples, that's Peter, James, and John, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, as Gentiles, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, the Jews, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, James, that's the brother of Jesus, Cephas is Peter, remember that's his Aramaic name, and John, the disciple John, when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, this is Paul writing, perceived the grace that was given to me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they should go to the circumcised. So interestingly enough, they have this strategic meeting and they divide up the work. Paul, you take care of the Gentiles. You're good at that. You seem to have a natural affinity for it. You go do that. We'll focus on the Jews. Now, what's interesting though is when you get to 1 Peter, it turns out Peter's probably not writing to Jews. He's probably writing to Gentiles. And the internal evidence of the text tells you that. So jump to that next page now. And these are hand-picked passages from 1 Peter that are indicating who the audience is, right? So let's just read these rapid fire real quick. Dave, you want to start us off there? We'll just go around the room here.
I'm sure. Peter 1:1.
Yep, that's exactly.
An apostle of Jesus Christ. To those who are elect exiles of the disposition in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia.
Ooh, you got all the names there. Yeah, the elect exiles of the dispersion. Now that's a code word, elect exiles. Normally exiles, if you think Old Testament, the exiles were the Jews who were taken away into Babylon. So when Peter calls these people that he's writing to the elect exiles of the dispersion, that seems to imply Jews. The next one.
Beloved, I urge you as
Sojourners
and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your souls.
Sojourners and exiles. So a sojourner is somebody who's on a journey, somebody who's not settled, who's not at home. And this is how Peter keeps referring to his audience, people who aren't at home in the world. But sojourners and exiles, again, that has a Jewish kind of thing to it. In the Old Testament, the Jews are the exiles. So is he writing to Jews here? Well, then you get to the next one. All right? Chancellor, check that.
As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance.
No, wait a minute. If they're Jews, they weren't formerly ignorant. That's a Gentile commentary. They're people who were Gentiles, pagans, and have become Christians. You used to not know anything, but now you know. He's not talking about Jews there. He wouldn't have said they were formerly ignorant. Similarly with the next one there.
Knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers.
Your forefathers didn't know squat. You've been ransomed from that. You've been rescued from that. These aren't Jews. All right? The next one there, 1 Peter 2. Somebody want to read that one?
But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Yeah, this is a big one. Once you were not a people, but now you are. He's writing to Gentiles. So what's weird about 1 Peter is he's using Jewish language to refer to Gentiles. Now, there's a really important reason for that. I'll get to it in just a minute. But notice this, because this is interesting. Tony, you want to finish us off there, 1 Peter 4?
Okay. Live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you.
If these are Jews, the Gentiles wouldn't be surprised if they weren't joining them for their flood of debauchery. These are Gentiles who've changed their lives, and now the other Gentiles they used to be with are saying, what's up? You're not coming to the temple prostitutes anymore? Why are you scorning the festivals to Zeus? So their lives have been changed somehow. Now, take a look at the commentary at the bottom, because this is interesting. The last paragraph is the most important one here. The best way to explain this, that I believe, this is me speaking here, it makes the most sense, is that Peter is talking to an audience of Christian Gentiles that because of their conversion to Christianity, Peter now considers them to be part of the Jewish inheritance. Peter thinks of them as honorary Jews. Remember, for Peter was the apostle to the Jews, right? He did not consider Christianity a new religion. Jesus was the fulfillment of Judaism. So it's just one solid stream for Peter, and now you Gentiles, you're part of the Jewish nation now, right? Now, think about that, because that's a weird way to think. We don't think of it that way. We think of Judaism as one thing, Christianity as another, but Peter didn't. For him, this is one story. So they are honorary or adopted Jews now that they become followers of Jesus, and the Jewish stories, heroes, and way of life are now theirs as well. The coming of Jesus isn't a separate and distinct cultural and historical event. It's the fulfillment and continuation of God's promise to the nation of Israel all throughout the Old Testament. Gentiles are now part of the family of God. Abraham and all the prophets have now become their forefathers by adoption into the family. Now, that's an interesting way to think about this. And I don't know if you've ever thought of yourself as an honorary Jew, or if you thought of yourself as a separate religion. But Peter doesn't think of it that way. There's only one story. You're either in the story or you're not. But there's not a separate story about Jesus. That's just a continuation of the same story.
So when you call them Christian Gentiles, he's writing to people that believe in Jesus.
Correct.
It's not just Old Testament and that's it.
Nope. These are Gentiles who have become Christians. That's very clear in the text. You'll see that when we read the first chapter. The first couple of verses are very clear. These are Christians. What kind of Christians? Probably Gentiles. But he keeps using this Jewish language to talk about them, which shows you that, again, a way that we don't think, they're part of the Jewish people now.
We used to refer somewhat to our background as Judaic-Christian.
Yeah, the Judeo-Christian worldview.
Because we would have been Gentiles, but we're not because we believe in Jesus. We are part of the family of God, so Abraham is our father.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So we do have some roots into being not the Jews of today, but into the Jewish.
Without going too far afield,
grafted in and everything, but so that we do claim Abraham as our father.
We should.
So maybe that's thinking like Peter was.
Yes,
thinking.
that's what I want to
you
encourage people to do, is to recognize that Peter thinks a little differently than we do, and I think he's right and we're wrong. When we think of it as a separate religion, there's Judaism, now there's Christianity, that's not the way Peter thought about it. And I think we get it wrong. We make a mistake. You know how we frequently divide Old Testament, New Testament? Old Testament, I don't know anything about that, but stories about prophets and stuff. New Testament, that's Christian stuff. Not in Peter's world. There's just the story of God. And that continues in the Old Testament, all the way through the fulfillment of Jesus and his resurrection, right into the New Testament. It's all the same story. So if you're a Christian, it's all about the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's one story. And I think that's really important. And that really gets to something, you're not going to have time to talk about this in your groups, but Paul, right in the middle of the book of Romans, he's chapters 9, 10, 11, he really wrestles with what about the Jews? What about the Jews who don't believe? And Paul actually makes this, he rides the fence, he goes back and forth. On the one hand, he'll say, God's going to provide a way to bring them in, somehow, some way, he doesn't even get into it. He just says, God will work it all out. But he also says, not everybody is a Jew just because they have Jewish blood. You're a Jew because of the promise, not by birth. It's not physical children of Abraham that make you Jewish. It's being part of the covenant promise. And in that way, Paul's argument in Romans is the same as Peter's here. You're Jews.
Is that
In the
all
sense.
Israel are Israel?
Yes, exactly. Not everybody who calls themselves Jewish is really part of the nation of Israel. That's right. And again, you're not going to have time to get into all that, and I wouldn't encourage you to, because that's going to lead you in a whole bunch of wild directions. But it's a really interesting way to think that I appreciate about the way Peter writes. Okay, background of 1 Peter. Just a couple things I want to point out to you real quick. 1 Peter, probably written from Rome. He has this cryptic reference in chapter 5, verse 13. He says, I'm writing to you from Babylon. But just like the book of Revelation refers to Rome as Babylon, he's probably talking about Rome. He doesn't really mean Babylon. The nation of Babylon was defeated hundreds of years before this text. But Babylon for Jewish people was always symbolic of big, bad world powers that oppressed God's people. The only big, bad world power oppressing God's people at this time is Rome. So he's probably in Rome. In fact, church history indicates that he was killed somewhere around 64, and this letter is probably written just before that. So he's in Rome 60, 61 AD, writing this letter, and he gets killed under Nero's persecution a couple years later. Now, we don't know much about his ministry in Rome. The Roman Catholic Church, of course, has the Vatican as the Cathedral of St. Paul and Peter, because Paul and Peter were both in Rome at the same time. Now, again, we don't have any record of their interacting with each other, but they were both there right around 60, 61. Paul gets killed in Rome around 62, 63. Peter gets killed 64-ish. So they both get killed under the same persecution in Rome, which is why the Vatican cathedrals, Paul and Peter, right? So 1 Peter focuses, the main idea in 1 Peter is the importance of believers bearing up under suffering and yet continue to live well. The whole book is about suffering and dealing with persecution. And being an exile. Remember that word? We've already hit it a couple times. Exiles, sojourners, nomads, citizens of another kingdom. That's the main idea. You live here, but this is not your home. That theme, you're going to see that flying through this book all the time. And part of the reason this is not your home is because the world does not accept you. They don't understand you. They think you're a weirdo. They don't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ like you do. You have a different inheritance than they do. And that's going to make you an outsider. So that's kind of the main idea here. However, don't go too far with that, because it's also clear from Peter that they have not, although they might be persecuted in word, they have not been persecuted to the point of being beaten or killed. Because Peter specifically says in the letter, I think it's chapter 4, you have not yet suffered to the point of shedding your blood. Which means they're not getting thrown to the lions, his audience here yet. The persecution under Nero has not broken out yet, which is why we think it's 60, 61. Because Nero's persecution kicked in around 62, 63. So this is not yet a death sentence to be a Christian, but increasingly it was meaning social, political, and economic exile from the community. If you weren't offering sacrifices to the Greek gods, you were a weirdo and they didn't know what to do with you. And they rejected you and mocked you. In that way, 1 Peter is a really good primer for us, because I think the more faithful a Christian you are in the coming years, the more weird you're going to be in the world we live in. And we're going to have to deal with that kind of stuff. Being an outcast, being an exile in our own country. This world is not our home. And that's why we picked 1 Peter. So, look at the last sentence of the middle paragraph, of the big paragraph, the last sentence. Actually, jump right in the middle. The apostle, the middle of that big paragraph. The apostle Peter called Christians to sanctify Christ as Lord in their hearts, that believers might live and act as Jesus desires during their short time here on earth. And that would include submission to authority, even unjust authority, in the government, in the home, in the workplace. Jesus becomes the focal point for ordering your life in the midst of these trials and tribulations. And by rooting their perseverance in the person and work of Christ, believers can cling to hope in the midst of their rejection by the world. 1 Peter is likely written prior to the persecutions by Nero, which began in 64. Sometime between 61 and 64. Nero's persecutions are often associated with arenas and Christians getting thrown to the lions. However, it is likely that Peter is not writing to address that kind of persecution. He's addressing a social persecution. Right? So that, again, a little more relevant.
It kind of touches base though, because like you said, Christians right now are getting frustrated because we're not.
You're on the outs.
We're on the outs.
That's right.
I keep hearing that, and yet that's exactly what they.
That's exactly right. Peter is writing to people who are on the outs and trying to deal with it. That's right. Yeah. All right, so that's all background stuff. You could do the whole night just on that. You do whatever you want, but you're probably not going to have time to get through all that. So pick whatever you want that's important or interesting to you and run with it. Give it 15, 20 minutes, and then move on. So let's get into the Bible study itself. We've only got 12 verses here. Somebody want to read those for us? And then I'm going to have you guys, we're going to divide up into groups and just go through the questions together so that you have a chance to talk to other people and wrestle with the same questions. You feel comfortable asking and answering them before you actually have to do it with a group. Right? Somebody want to read 1 to 12 for us?
Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and the sanctification of the Spirit for obedience to Jesus Christ and for the sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. Blessed be the God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefilable, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. And this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes through it is tested by fire, may be found to result in the praise and the glory and the honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is unexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time of Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicated the suffering of Christ and the subsequent glories. It was revealed to them that they were serving not themselves, but you, in the things that have now been announced to you through those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things in which angels long to look.
There's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of stuff there. I would encourage you, again, to read this several times. Read it once a day for 4 or 5 days. Just have it burn in your head. And try to find something new every time you read it. So just pick out something. Sometimes you're amazed, just a couple words you didn't pay attention to, and then all of a sudden they jump out at you. Practice that kind of thing, and it will help you a little bit with hearing the text and letting it resonate with you. So let's do this. Let's divide up into groups. And we've got space over here and in here. We can put 2 groups in here and 1 over here, or in the choir room. And let's just go through these questions and as a group.
Let's get that off.
Yeah, thank you.